Hey, are you a business owner, entrepreneur, or professional? If so, we want you to apply to be a featured guest on our show. My name is Adam Torres, and I host the Mission Matters series of podcasts. I've recorded over 3,000 episodes, and we are just getting started. How do you know if you'd be a good guest to be on the show? Well, only one way to find out, and that's to apply, but I'm going to let you in on a little secret. We want guests that have a story to tell, guests with a brand, a product, or a service that can benefit my audience of listeners. If this sounds like you, go to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. I'd love to talk to you and get to know more about your story. Again, head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, now let's get into the show. Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Mission Matters Innovation Podcast, your source for all things innovation. My name is Adam Torres. You can follow me on Instagram at AskAdamTorres. Keep up with my book releases, book tour schedule, signings, all that other good stuff. Always love to connect with you there. And as always, if you'd like to apply to become a co-author of one of my upcoming books, just head on over to the website, missionmatters.com, and click on Become an Author to apply. All right, so today I have Martin Lessem on the line. He's principal consultant and founder over at Lessem Regulatory Consulting Group. Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Adam. Thank you for having me.
All right, Martin, so I'm excited to get into today's topic. So we'll talk about consulting during COVID times. I mean, many consultants out there affected as well as businesses. I think that's it's pretty obvious there, but I'd like to know, we're going to delve into what you've managed to do and how you've managed to thrive during this time. But before we get into that, let's go a little bit further into your company. So tell us a little bit more about Lessem Regulatory Consulting Group, please.
Sure. So Lessem Regulatory Consulting Group is a pharma and biotech consulting. We primarily do regulatory affairs consulting for companies, so helping them deal with health authorities around the world, specifically things like the FDA, Health Canada, MHRA in the UK, the EMA in Europe. We've done a little bit of work with the TGA in Australia, and we've got some partnerships that help us do things in sub-Saharan Africa as well. So we primarily focus on regulatory strategy, but if I need to reach out to some of my colleagues, we can also get you consulting on some CMC things. We can do regulatory labeling, regulatory intelligence, and that's sort of what we do in a nutshell.
So I think one of the interesting things about your practices, I mean, you're truly worldwide. I mean, you're dealing with issues, you're dealing with different governments, municipalities, I mean, healthcare systems or lack thereof. I mean, you're all over the place. And so now when something like COVID hits and you're all of a sudden not able to travel or maybe do some of the things that you were able to do previously, I mean, things are different now, aren't they?
They certainly are. It's actually quite interesting because my business kind of increased last year, which is probably the opposite of what most people thought would happen. Mm-hmm. But we have the advantage of, especially a lot of independent consultants or smaller consulting groups have the advantage of very often working remotely anyways. So we're used to we're sort of used to that environment, which makes it very easy for us to adapt. So if a larger company comes and says, hey, we need somebody who can do this remotely, are you capable of doing that? Mm-hmm. Then the answer is essentially yes, and modern technology has helped us quite a bit. There are plenty of video conferencing softwares out there that have gotten so much use and so much play in the last year that have certainly been a big boon. The FDA has handled most of their meetings in sort of a televideo presence mode. Mm-hmm. The same has been true for the EMA and MHRA, and even Health Canada has sort of gotten into that as well now recently. So it's been a system where if you're willing to adapt to it, it works very well for you. So, for myself, I think it's just been a good situation last year.
Man, I'm glad to hear that, and it's interesting because I do agree with you completely in terms of some of the people that have been working remote or the smaller, like you didn't have to worry about, okay, now my entire workforce is of 1,000 people are now remote. What do I do? And it shuts you down for a couple of months, right? Like you're like, okay, well, what you're in fact stepping in and helping other companies also. So I think it's amazing. How would you say overall? Just high level, the pharma landscape has changed in the last year that you've noticed.
So overall, I think one of the things pharma's realized is that a lot of jobs that they thought had to be done in an office have been able to move remotely, especially things like regulatory affairs. You know, it's always interesting when you look at a situation like that and you've had this paradigm of, oh, you have to be sitting behind your desk to do this job, when in reality, I can just as easily sit behind my desk at home, do the job with as much, if not almost more efficiency, and it works very well. Now, there are obviously some roles in pharma that can't be done remotely. You can't, for example, do lab work remotely. That's incredibly difficult, if not impossible.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's especially when they're looking at bringing people back into the offices, they're looking at targeting those jobs that absolutely have to come back. So labs are the first group that generally comes back. Manufacturing usually comes back at the same time, if not before. A lot of the quality control aspects of that are moving back into offices because they need to be there to be able to do those QC checks and audits. But a lot of the things that don't have to go back into offices so far haven't. And it's created interesting workflows because some people are happy with it, some people aren't. And very often when you have the, you know, other things that happen in pharma, such as mergers and acquisitions, that's sort of when you have these weird openings where you've had a company that's merged with another, so now you've got 3 or 4 openings because people didn't move over. And that's usually where companies like mine step in and say, hey, we can fill those holes while you do your full-time job search.
No, that's great.
So,
and I tell you, I've never worked in pharma, but I did work in finance for almost 14 years. And one of the most interesting things to me is exactly what you said, but related to finance, was that I could never imagine in a million years that, like, you know, people that worked at these large companies, like I once worked at, you know, huge, I mean, multi-trillion-dollar companies in terms of assets. And now, you know, they're like the people that are taking phone calls or working, their advisors or otherwise are at home. And I'm like, wow, I would have never imagined in a million years, like, them having access and everything at home to, you know, to make trade or to do other things like that. It just blows my mind. It's just a whole new world.
I definitely agree. And I think that one of the things that's really led to that is, you know, the advances in technology that we've had, and not just so much the fact that the technology's gotten better, but that it's gotten less expensive. If you had asked me 10 years ago, would I be able to work from home and you know, if absolutely worst came to worst and we were still doing paper submissions, do I have enough ability to handle a paper submission at home? The answer would have been no, of course not. My little BestJet printer would die after the first volume. You know, but now most of us have decent laser printers at home because they're not that expensive. We all have the ability to do copying at home. And, you know, as that technology has advanced with the advent of those electronic submissions that almost all health authorities are now requiring, I don't even need that much of a printing capacity because all I need to do is get a signature on a document, and that can be done, even that can be done electronically these days as long as your system is validated.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And it's just, I love it though. Obviously I don't like the reason why we're in this place, right? Like, we don't want people to be hurt or what's going on in the world, obviously. But like the progress that certain industries and certain businesses have made, I think there's just going to be this expansion based off of some of the things that you're mentioning today. So I think it's going to be interesting to see this new renaissance of whatever this looks like, this new work at home / you know, some are in the office / some are more outsourced. Like our business also grew up because a lot of people ended up using us for things instead of building things in house, which we had a great year too, and we'd always worked remotely too. So that was one of the interesting things as a company that we built from the beginning, more so out of necessity than anything. We didn't really think to do it any other way. So there's some. I think there's a lot of opportunity going forward. And speaking of opportunity, what kind of opportunities are you seeing in your industry and in the pharma landscape overall?
So a lot of the opportunities that we're seeing right now are very specialist focused. Pharma is an interesting industry in the sense that it's a continuously growing industry because there's always a need for that next great product. And as you keep moving forward, one of the things you're seeing is a lot of biotech companies starting up that are very, very specialized. They're looking at, they're looking at a disease that occurs in a very certain genetic population. They're looking at a disease that can be treated with a very targeted therapy. And the more you start looking at things like that, the more you're going to need people that understand that concept, that have dealt with it before. But not only that, as you have more and more biotech startup, you need more and more regulatory people, and you need more and more clinical people, and the non-clinical set and all of that. So where that comes in right now is we can offer that kind of specialty expertise on a small level while they're building their company. And we are, in to handle their initial submissions with the FDA, for example, their pre-IND meetings, their IND submissions, while they do a search for, full-time regulatory staff. So we can kind of offer that bridging ability that they're lacking. And I think that's a really good space for consulting companies to be in right now because there's a lot of demand for it.
Fantastic. Well, Martin, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today and learning more about your business, but also about what's going on in the regulatory space all around. That being said, if somebody is listening to this and they want to connect and learn more about Lessem Regulatory Consulting Group, what's the best way for them to reach out and to connect?
Sure. The best way for them to reach out and connect is to actually go straight to our website. There's a contact us form on there that'll come straight to me, and I'll be able to reach back to them. And the address, the URL for that is lrcg.consulting.
Perfect. Well, Martin, again, thank you for coming on the show. And to the audience, as always, thank you for tuning in. Hope you got a lot of value out of this. Hope you learned a lot. If you did, don't forget, hit that subscribe button. We definitely want you to be a return listener or viewer, so definitely do that. We have more great guests coming up for you. And Martin, thanks again for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Adam.